Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Danielle et vous nous joignez aujourd'hui sur Climate Action Figures.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Climate Action Figures. As always, my name is John Whidden, and this week on the show you get to meet Danielle. But first, this week's Quick Fix, which comes from Barbara in Medicine Hat, Alberta. She emailed us to say, we were selected to be part of the city's food waste composting pilot. I'm excited to do this, but a little bit icked out by the raw meat, etc., going into my bucket. So I came across this, and she shared with us a link, which I will share in the show notes today and on social media, as a solution. We have a huge pile of old newspaper that I will be using for this purpose. I thought of you and your show. So what she sent in this link was kind of an origami newspaper folded into the compost bucket that looks like it fits beautifully. And then apparently you don't have to worry about it all coming into contact with your bucket and getting icked out. I love that. Welcome, Danielle. What do you think about that quick fix?
I think it's great. I think that instead of shying away from doing the composting, that Barbara's finding a solution that helps her take those steps towards making it work.
Composting is great. We have a little compost bucket under our sink and we just rinse it out from time to time. We know some people who actually use Javex in theirs, and I think that can't be good for the garden, but it's their way of keeping things clean. Everybody does their own thing, and we end up not throwing away all that compost, which is amazing when you think about how much we actually put into the landfill that could be used for making great soil, right?
Definitely.
Now, Danielle, you are involved with the Francophone community in Edmonton, correct?
Yeah.
Thus your great introduction today. Nice to have a French introduction to our podcast for once. I'm not going to ask you to speak for that community or for Quebec particularly, but I often wonder, it seems to me I hear about things in Quebec where they seem more concerned about the environment than maybe the average person from Alberta. And I'm wondering if that's true of the French community or of Quebec. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, I can't speak for the, Francophone community as a whole. We're all quite different across provinces, but I would say that in Quebec, the people there are generally tightly bound linguistically, and so there's something that brings them together. So if there's a bit more of a united front in terms of climate action, it's because there's a bit more of a tight-knit sense in general in trying to preserve and protect part of their identity. Whereas, in Alberta, we have a very diverse population and also politically a system that maybe isn't driven to take huge climate action. And so in terms of what binds Quebecois people together, there's a little bit more there. So that could be part of that more collective incentive towards taking steps to mitigate climate change.
Right. As an aside, you love the Francophone community in Edmonton. Some people might be surprised that there's a very strong Francophone community there. Do you want to give a little plug to the Francophone community in Edmonton?
Yeah, sure. We exist. We are here. We're vibrant. We're pretty awesome. I'm in lots of Francophone schools every day, and it's pretty awesome to see how many people are still speaking French, sending their kids to French school, and maintaining the strong Francophone community that's established here in Edmonton and across the province.
Very cool. Danielle, I often seem to leave the climate action from the guest until later in the episode. So just to be different, let's start with it today. What have you chosen as your climate action?
Okay, so there's kind of two things. But a few years ago, I had seen an article talking about microplastics in just everything that we eat, we drink, and how this plastic problem is kind of all-consuming. And so being a little bit stressed out about that, I started to think about ways that I could reduce my plastic consumption. So the two, small steps, but biggest things that I've done has just been to be really intentional about what I'm purchasing and intentionally avoiding things that are packaged in plastic or wrapped in plastic or processed somehow with plastic. So the first step generally for me is the grocery store. So I don't buy any produce that come in plastic bags or plastic containers. If I absolutely have to, then sure, but I try to avoid it at all costs. So that means selecting vegetables and fruit that are not wrapped in plastic. Sometimes that means going to the farmer's market to get fruit that's in, little cardboard boxes instead, or that is just not packaged whatsoever. And the second thing was just about kind of everyday products. So in terms of like soap and face cream, hair products, stuff like that, I also just took a fairly intentional step to avoid anything that's in plastic. So one of my favorite companies is Rocky Mountain Soap Co. And they have their bar soap that is just wrapped in paper. So again, a super low environmental impact there. It's not a plastic bottle. It's more eco-friendly. It's better for your health. They also have refillable stuff. And then all of their face products come in glass jars, which you can also bring back to them. They wash them and then reuse them for future products. So there's way more of this reduce, reuse, recycle in their whole process, which I really like. So those are kind of some of the steps that I take. So just really being intentional about avoiding anything that's packaged and wrapped in plastic.
It's great to see more companies making that available to consumers to refill. I bet you're also a patron of the local refillery. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Right by my mom's house, there's Earth General Store, and they have a huge refill section for everything. So bringing in my bottles there to get, cleaning products refilled, or just all the different things that I can have refilled. So reusing my bottles.
Yeah, we love our local refillery. To our listener, if you have never discovered your local refillery, there will be one near you. Just look it up and check it out. It's very cool. You mentioned food. We have also tried to avoid food that comes in necessary plastic packaging or unnecessary plastic packaging. But as a result, there are some things we just don't eat much anymore, like grapes. Have you given up on grapes too?
I was never a huge fan of grapes.
Oh, okay.
So that one was an easy one to give up. I think the hardest one was actually meat. I do still eat meat. And what I actually found was great for that was a few years ago, I bought half a cow and the butcher just did everything in paper. So now all of the meat that I have in my freezer is wrapped in paper instead of in plastic. And I very rarely will buy meat that's wrapped in plastic. A lot of times there's some great local butchers that will even do things like chicken in paper instead of in plastic.
Yes. And our local butcher probably, actually, I was going to say he thinks I'm crazy, but he doesn't seem to think I'm crazy. I always say I'm the crazy guy with the reusable containers. I'll go in with my Tupperware type containers and they'll put ground beef in there or chicken or whatever I want. So if we just ask, sometimes that'll happen.
Absolutely.
Danielle, you mentioned stress over microplastics. This is interesting. We had a guest on a few weeks ago, Arian, a young man from Calgary, who's really working on the microplastic problem and developing a little robot that goes around and scans local waterways and separates plastic from the local environment. Is stress over the environment a regular thing in your mind all the time, or does it pop up every now and then? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I've asked some guests before, 1 being it's not a problem at all, and 10 being I can't sleep at night. Where would you put yourself on that scale?
I would say probably a 5, but it comes and goes. So it kind of depends on what's going on. When all that research was coming out about microplastics, it was just really shocking because it's in everything. So if it's coming down in the rain and then going into the ground, then it's almost unavoidable. And I think that's what's stressful, is the idea that we can't do anything about it. But then I also have to remind myself that human beings are brilliant and incredible. And of course, we can find a solution to it. And I think it's overwhelming when we look at the big picture of, okay, I'm just one person, so what can I do? And that's why I love this idea with your podcast, is that it's to take back control. It's actually just the little things that we do, that if everybody did a million little things, then it would create great change. I can't eliminate all the plastic today myself, but I can absolutely reduce the amount of plastic that I'm consuming and that I'm putting back into the landfill. And that helps reduce the stress. So it's acknowledging the stress, acknowledging that it's a real problem, but also seeing what I can do to help and not aggravate this problem or make it worse.
Right. Danielle, let me ask you this. We hear in the media sometimes that the younger generation now is upset with the older generation, saying, you've created this problem and now you expect us to solve it. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I think that the answer to that is fairly complex because every previous generation has been trying to do their best. And so if we could go back in time, if they could go back in time and know that this was the outcome to their actions, they probably would have made different choices. But us as young people are also making choices that have long-term impacts. If we look at our technological waste or even how much heat is emitted through data consumption, but we're obsessed with technology and that's a thing of our generation. So I think it's unfair to blame everything on previous generations when each generation has had an impact on the environment. And placing blame on other people doesn't actually move the conversation forward in a helpful way. We all have to live on this earth, whether we're 80 or 10 years old. And so taking an approach of taking care of each other and wanting the best for future generations can come from every single generation that's currently on this earth. And I think that's a better solution instead of just blaming others, because blaming doesn't actually have a positive impact moving forward. And we can't undo the actions of the past. We can only change our present actions to have an impact on the future.
A very mature statement. Laying blame doesn't move the conversation forward. Great point. Now, here's another question for you. As we head into what could be a potentially warm summer, and it's worse in the southern part of Alberta than it is further north where you are, but a lot of people in either place will use air conditioning. Do you have any great tips for our listeners on keeping cool without having your air conditioning running all the time?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do to keep my apartment cool in the summertime is to be pretty intentional about making meals that don't require cooking. So I'm not turning on my stove or my oven, making things like salads or cold soups that just don't require that heat output, which then helps the temperature stay cooler in my apartment, as well as opening the windows at nighttime and making sure they're closed during the day, unless it's a breezy day, in which case I'll have them open. But yeah, trying to bring the cold air in at night and then keeping the cold air in during the daytime.
Right. We're a bit fanatic about that around here too. We look at the forecast just before bed in the summer and make sure there's going to be no big wind or thunderstorm. And then we open up every window in the house. And, you can hear all the air conditioners running half the night. And in the morning, it's almost too cold in our house. Typically, it'll be, 15, 16 degrees. And when everything is cool in the house, the cupboards, the floor, everything's cool, then that maintains the cool in the house for a surprisingly long time in the day. You may have heard that we have our very own engineer on the program. And since I am kind of a pretend engineer, I hang around with Jeff, so I like to think I'm an engineer too. I will always suggest to people that if they're trying to cool their indoor space and the temperature outside is cooler than the inside, I always suggest to them that they point their fan out the window. So instead of just moving warm air around the room, we're blowing the warm air out the window, which must cause it cooler air to get pulled in somewhere else. Do you ever do that?
No, but I don't have a fan in my place, actually. So if I did, I would definitely try it. So one of the things that I think we don't often consider in terms of trying to keep the temperature down in our places, especially in the summertime, is how much heat is emitted by our screens. So TVs being on for quite a while, even computers, desktops, laptops, they do emit quite a bit of heat. So making sure that the TV is turned off when you're not watching it, making sure that your computer is off when you're not using it. So things like that definitely have a big impact because they do emit heat. So those definitely help to keep the temperature cooler.
Yes, for sure. And sometimes you go into someone's house and their TV's on all the time because it's got some beautiful scene from a beach somewhere. And I think, that's beautiful, but your TV's on all the time, really? Or I often will see people's phones are sitting on the counter and they're on. I think just click the button and shut it off. You're going to save some battery, save some energy. We actually have one of those energy testers that you can run any of your electrical appliances through and see how much energy it takes. And we've checked things in our house, done some crazy experiments like, is it more efficient to boil water with a kettle or the microwave? And the kettle wins hands down, almost half as much power as the microwave. But the interesting thing that we've found out through the various experiments we've done is how much power bleeds through things that are just plugged in but not on. I'm trying to think of the worst one. You know what? We have a heating pad, and you plug in the heating pad, and you have it off so it's cold, and it is using as much power as a small light bulb all the time. So we're a bit crazy with that too, and unplug everything all the time. I don't know if you think about that.
Yeah, my old roommates used to unplug everything. So all of the appliance, the coffee maker, the kettle, the TVs, the lamps even. So for example, in the morning, I unplug my lamp beside my bed because I don't use it during the day when I'm gone. And then at nighttime when I want to use it, I plug it back in. And yeah, it's a mindful habit, but it does add up over time to just not have everything plugged in because that ghost energy is still being used when you're not using that appliance.
Absolutely. Or a power bar. We have our TV and stereo and everything that's set up downstairs on a power bar. So we just switch it all off all the time until we're watching it. So we're nearing the end of our time together, Danielle. I wonder if you would tell us what gives you hope in this world today.
I think the biggest thing that brings me hope is just the idea that human beings are brilliant and have always found ways to survive in the most complex, complicated, and stressful situations. And so while climate change might be scary and overwhelming, I think there are a lot of people working on some really great things. And we all have a desire to live and to live in a wonderful world. And so it gives me hope that we will continue to further research, produce new technology, and find ways to repair some of the damage that's been caused to the earth, and find ways to move forward in a greener way and in a way that's more sustainable that will allow us to live on this earth for a really, really long time, for many generations to come.
Well, that is a hopeful message indeed. And we thank you very much for taking time to be here with us today, Danielle.
Thank you for having me on the show.
And thank you for being here, dear listener. If you know of a youth who should be on Climate Action Figures, please send us an email or get in touch via social media, and we'd be happy to have a new guest on the podcast. We will be back again next week, same time, same place, to hear from another Climate Action Figure. Until then,
go figures!
This has been Climate Action Figures. Our show is produced and hosted by John Whidden. Our creative consultant is Kayla McIntosh. Our theme song is Hawaii Vacation by Tavares. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Climate Action Figures. That's all one word. And if you have any other questions or comments that arose from this or any episode, feel free to reach out to us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another Climate Action Figure.